You know, if I say the name Miyagi to you, I mean, I can almost guarantee exactly what pops into your head right now.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. You are picturing a wise, quiet, completely fictional martial arts master. Like, he's standing in a sun-baked courtyard somewhere in California, right?
Yeah, probably telling some teenager to paint a fence or wax a car.
Exactly. Or maybe he's, trying to catch a fly with a pair of chopsticks.
It's the ultimate cinematic mentor archetype. It's that pop culture shorthand for ancient mystical wisdom being passed down in a suburban backyard.
Totally.
You think of someone who is intrinsically peaceful, like almost a pacifist,
Yeah.
who only uses violence as an absolute last resort.
And even then, he does it with this sort of weary reluctance. It's comforting and it's familiar.
Right.
But here's where we take that image and we are going to completely shatter it today. Because the fictional Mr. Miyagi, from the Karate Kid and the Cobra Kai series, he didn't just spring out of a screenwriter's imagination.
Not at all.
No, he is directly inspired by a real flesh and blood historical titan. A man named Chojun Miyagi, the actual founder of Goju-Ryu karate.
And his real-life story is honestly so much more intense and complex than the movies.
Oh, and frankly, physically brutal. Way more brutal than anything you have ever seen on a movie screen.
Yeah, the cinematic version is basically a sanitized whisper of the actual man. So the mission for this deep dive is to unpack the untold reality of the real Chojun Miyagi.
I am so ready for this.
We are going to explore how this one man took an obscure underground Okinawan fighting style, preserved it from the brink of total extinction, and navigated these terrifying geopolitical pressures to transform it into a global phenomenon.
And we have a massive stack of sources for this deep dive today. I mean, we've got historical documents, letters, dojo lineages, and martial arts treatises to get through.
It's a lot of material.
It really is. We're charting a course through ancient Okinawan history, diving into the lineages of Chinese martial arts, navigating the highly charged political climate of pre-World War II mainland Japan, and even looking at the gritty evolution of modern combat sports like MMA.
Right. And to really understand the magnitude of what Chojun Miyagi accomplished, you have to look at the geopolitical reality of Okinawa at the turn of the 20th century.
Okay, set the stage for us.
Well, Okinawa wasn't always just a prefecture of Japan. Originally, it was the independent Ryukyu Kingdom.
Right, I remember that from the sources.
Because of its geography sitting right there in the East China Sea, it was a major maritime crossroads. It was this thriving trade hub, absorbing influences from Siam, from Malaya, from Japan, but crucially, most heavily from China.
See, I always think of trade hubs as these cosmopolitan utopias where everyone is just peacefully swapping recipes and philosophies.
That would be nice, but no.
Yeah. The history of the Ryukyu Kingdom is actually incredibly dark. This wasn't just a peaceful exchange of ideas over tea.
Not even close. The Ryukyu Kingdom was constantly under the threat of larger, more aggressive empires. In 1609, the Satsuma domain of Japan invaded.
Wow.
And they essentially turned the kingdom into a vassal state. They extracted wealth, imposed strict laws, and basically began a centuries-long process of cultural strangulation.
That sounds intense.
It was. By 1879, the modernized Japanese Meiji government formally abolished the Ryukyu Kingdom altogether.
Yeah.
They just wiped it off the map as an independent entity and incorporated it as Okinawa Prefecture.
So imagine being an Okinawan at that time. You have this rich, distinct culture, you have your own language, your own customs, and you are facing immense systemic pressure to assimilate into the Japanese mainland.
Yeah, you are facing the very real threat of total cultural erasure.
Your history is literally being rewritten for you, and that is the exact pressure cooker into which Chojun Miyagi is born.
Exactly. It's an environment of profound existential anxiety. And, to understand the martial art he created, we have to understand the man's beginning.
Which actually subvert a lot of the tropes we expect.
Right. Very much so. Miyagi's origin story is surprisingly far removed from that ascetic, impoverished monk stereotype we usually associate with martial arts legends.
Right.
Chojun Miyagi was born in 1888 in Naha, Okinawa. But he wasn't born into poverty. He was born into a highly privileged, wealthy merchant and landowner family.
Which changes the entire trajectory of his life. I mean, if you are a subsistence farmer in Okinawa in 1888, you are working from dawn until dusk just to put a bowl of rice on the table.
You don't have the time or the calories to spare.
Exactly. You don't have the caloric surplus to dedicate yourself to mastering some esoteric combat system. But Miyagi had resources. He had free time.
He did.
And at the age of 14, he takes a step that changes martial arts history forever. He walks into the dojo of a man named Kanryo Higaonna.
Which is a huge deal.
Yeah, now Higaonna was a legendary master of what they called Naha-te, which literally just translates to the fighting style of the Naha region.
And we have to pause on Higaonna here,
Yeah.
because he wasn't just any local teacher. He had opened his dojo in Naha in 1887.
Just a year before Miyagi was born.
Right. And that makes it one of the absolute oldest, independent, specialized martial arts dojos in all of Okinawa.
That's a crucial pivot in history.
Oh, absolutely. Before Higaonna, martial arts in Okinawa were highly secretive. They were passed down behind closed doors.
Usually in the middle of the night, right?
Yes, mostly among the displaced aristocracy who needed to protect themselves. There were definitely no neon signs saying karate classes here.
Obviously not. So how did Higaonna get to the point of teaching openly?
Well, Higaonna had spent 15 years in Fuzhou, China, mastering Chinese martial arts, specifically Southern Shaolin boxing styles, before returning to his homeland to teach openly.
Okay, so Miyagi is this wealthy 14-year-old kid, and he starts training under Higaonna. He dedicates his teenage years to this brutal system.
He was obsessed.
But then we get to 1904. Miyagi is a young man, he's coming into his own, and he wants to see the world. And specifically, he decides he wants to go to Hawaii.
Yeah, that always surprises people.
It blew my mind. The real Mr. Miyagi wanted to move to Hawaii in 1904.
But Higaonna intervenes.
Right. He basically blocks the trip and pushes Miyagi to go to Fuzhou, China, instead, leading a group of migrant coastal fishery workers.
You have to look at Higaonna's internal calculus here. I mean, he had waited 15 years to find a student with Miyagi's raw physical potential and his obsessive dedication.
He didn't want to lose him.
Exactly. Higaonna knew that if Miyagi went to Hawaii, he might become a successful businessman, maybe make a fortune in the plantations, but the martial art would die.
So he forces the issue.
He knew that to truly master the art, Miyagi had to experience its pure, unadulterated essence at the source. He couldn't just learn it secondhand in a courtyard in Naha.
So this is like a young music prodigy wanting to go to LA to become a pop star, but his strict mentor forces him to go to Vienna to study classical composition at the source.
It is a perfect analogy. Yeah. He needed to feel the environment, the climate, the culture that actually forged these movements.
Right, but why China specifically? I mean, why not just stay in Okinawa and train with the master who already went there? If I want to learn French cooking, I don't necessarily have to move to Paris if I have a 3-Michelin-star French chef living next door to me in New York.
Because martial arts, especially at that time, they weren't just a list of techniques you could memorize from a textbook.
Okay.
They were deeply embedded in the culture, the philosophy, and the localized physics of the region. Fuzhou, which is in Fujian province in China, was the epicenter of martial arts for the Ryukyu people.
It was a massive hub.
A huge, bustling hub of trade and cultural exchange. You had different schools, different philosophies, all crashing into each other.
Yeah.
Higaonna knew that for Miyagi's art to become three-dimensional, he had to immerse himself in that specific ecosystem.
I see. So it's less about just learning the physical punches and more about understanding the soil the tree grew in.
Exactly.
So Miyagi gets to Fuzhou. What exactly is the martial arts ecosystem there? Like, what is he exposing himself to?
Well, Fuzhou was the undisputed capital of Southern Chinese martial arts. We're talking specifically about styles like Fujian White Crane and various forms of Southern Shaolin boxing.
Okay.
The biomechanics taught there were incredibly sophisticated. We're talking about a deep, structural understanding of human anatomy.
Which is fascinating.
And the historical records point to the heavy influence of a specific location called the Kojo Dojo in Fuzhou. And this dojo was radically different from what we think of as modern karate today.
Because modern karate is very linear.
Yeah.
Straight punches, high kicks.
Right. But the Kojo system utilized a 50-50 split of striking and grappling.
Wait, grappling, like wrestling.
Yes, essentially.
That's wild. I think of karate and I picture, two guys standing 5 feet apart, throwing punches in the air. I do not picture them rolling on the ground or wrestling.
Yeah, that's the modern, sanitized version we see now. The original Chinese influence systems utilized a highly complex form of stand-up grappling and joint manipulation called tuit. Yeah. The philosophy was that in a real life-or-death confrontation, you wouldn't just trade strikes at a distance. You would crash into your opponent, trap their limbs, lock their joints, and shatter their structural integrity.
Man, so you are grabbing a wrist, twisting the elbow past its natural breaking point, and throwing them to the ground.
Exactly.
That is vicious.
It is entirely pragmatic for survival. And even the strikes they used were entirely different from the modern closed fist punch. They favored the one-knuckle fist, palm strikes, and the side of the hand.
Let's actually break that down, because the one-knuckle fist sounds like something out of a comic book.
It does sound crazy.
If I'm going to punch someone in the face, I want to use my whole fist. Why on earth would I extend a single middle knuckle? Doesn't that just guarantee I'm going to break my own finger?
If you don't condition it properly, absolutely, you will shatter your hand.
Right.
But think about the physics of surface area. If you hit someone with a flat palm or a large padded boxing glove, the kinetic energy of your strike is dispersed over a wide area.
So it spreads out.
Right. It causes blunt force trauma, which is damaging, but the energy is spread. Now imagine taking that exact same amount of kinetic energy and funneling it entirely into a surface area the size of a dime, the single extended joint of your middle knuckle.
Wow, it's the difference between being hit by a baseball bat and being stabbed by an ice pick?
Exactly. You aren't aiming for the jawbone. You are targeting the soft tissue. You are driving that single knuckle into the intercostal spaces between the ribs or into specific nerve clusters in the neck and armpits.
That is just chillin'.
It is an anatomical precision strike designed to bypass the skeletal structure and completely shock the nervous system. That is the level of biomechanical violence Miyagi was studying in Fuzhou.
And he had a massive advantage over almost everyone else who made this pilgrimage to China, including his own teacher, Higaonna. He had serious financial backing.
Oh, this cannot be overstated.
Right, because when Higaonna went to China decades earlier, he trained under incredibly difficult financial conditions.
Yeah, he was essentially working himself to the bone, doing manual labor just to survive.
Yeah.
Sneaking in training when his body was already completely exhausted.
But Miyagi was different.
Miyagi held a salaried position, overseeing those migrant fishery workers. He was financially secure.
Which means he's eating better.
He's eating better, he's sleeping better, he has the luxury of actual recovery. This financial security allowed him to train with a level of intensity, focus, and nutritional support that poorer martial artists simply couldn't afford.
That's a huge edge.
He could devote his absolute maximum physical and mental energy to analyzing the mechanics of the art. He wasn't just surviving, he was thriving in the most elite martial arts laboratory in the world.
But that period of intense, focused study in China eventually comes to an end. Miyagi returns to Okinawa, bringing all the sophisticated knowledge back with him.
And things change very fast.
Right, almost immediately, he's thrust into a leadership role way faster than anyone anticipated.
The timeline accelerates dramatically here. In 1915, his master, Kanryo Higaonna, passes away at the age of 63. Miyagi is only 27 years old.
By today's standards, that's still a young guy figuring out his career.
Right, but in the martial arts ecosystem of early 20th century Okinawa, he is immediately recognized as the legitimate successor.
So he is suddenly the man responsible for carrying the entire Naha-te tradition on his shoulders.
Exactly.
I love reading the first-hand accounts of what he was like during this period. We have these descriptions from a young student of his, a guy named Meitoku Yagi, who eventually became a legend in his own right.
Yeah, Yagi's accounts are fascinating.
He described the young Miyagi as having piercing eyes and a body like a rock.
Which really speaks to the absolute physical crucible that was his training regimen. Miyagi didn't just inherit a title, he embodied the physical extreme of the art.
Completely.
And this brings us to the absolute core of Miyagi's methodology. The engine that drove his entire system, his absolute unrelenting obsession with the Sanchin kata.
Okay, let's really unpack Sanchin. Because if you walk into a strip mall karate dojo today, you usually see kids doing these long, flowing, choreographed routines, right?
Yeah. Forms that go all over the room.
They're blocking high, punching low, doing spinning kicks, pretending to fight 5 invisible ninjas at once. Looks like a dance. But Miyagi didn't teach like that at all. His approach to kata was radically different.
It was the complete antithesis of modern performative karate. Miyagi broke everything down to its most microscopic, agonizingly slow components.
So it wasn't flashy.
Not at all.
Mm-hmm.
Sanchin is a foundational form, a highly isometric, tension-filled exercise that looks incredibly simple from the outside, but is torturous to perform correctly.
Because of the tension.
Right. Miyagi wouldn't just have you run through it to warm up. He would spend entire days focusing solely on how your big toe gripped the floor.
Just the big toe.
Just the toe. Then the next day, he might only allow you to practice the exact rotation of the wrist.
And there was a massive, overarching emphasis on breathing. This isn't just taking a deep breath to relax before a workout. There is a specific technique mentioned called Ibuki.
Ibuki is intense. It's a form of hard, resonant, almost guttural breathing. Think of it as a biomechanical tool rather than just normal respiration.
Okay, how does it work?
It involves heavily contracting the abdominal muscles, locking down the diaphragm, and forcing the air out with intense, pressurized resistance.
I'm trying to visualize the utility of this in an actual fight. If I'm breathing out that hard and tensing every muscle in my core, I'm basically turning my torso into a solid block of wood.
I like to use the analogy of hydraulic cylinder for this.
Okay.
If a hydraulic cylinder is empty of fluid, you can crush it easily. But if you pump it full of fluid and pressurize it, it becomes capable of holding up a bridge.
Yeah, I see.
Ibuki breathing pressurizes the human core. It creates a rigid internal structure that can absorb massive blunt force trauma, like taking a full force kick to the ribs without the internal organs rupturing.
That makes a lot of sense.
And conversely, it allows the practitioner to generate explosive kinetic energy. You are synchronizing the absolute peak of your exhalation with the exact microsecond your strike lands, transferring the entire mass of your tense body into the target.
It's all about maximum efficiency and power. And there's this fascinating historical debate regarding Sanchin in the sources. Did Miyagi perform it with open hands or closed fists?
Yeah, that's a major point of contention among historians. The original Chinese forms that influenced Sanchin were almost certainly performed with open hands.
Utilizing those palm strikes and finger thrusts we talked about earlier.
Exactly, heavily reflecting the Fujian white crane influence. The transition to closed, clenched fists in modern Goju-Ryu Sanchin likely happened later, as the art adapted to different physical philosophies.
But the core mechanics stayed the same.
Right. Whether open or closed, the internal mechanics of the breath remain the same.
So put yourself in the shoes of a student in Miyagi's backyard dojo back then. Imagine doing the exact same fundamental movement, stepping forward an inch, breathing out with that guttural ibuki sound, throwing a single slow-motion strike every single day for years.
It sounds mind-numbing.
It really does. You never learn a spinning kick. You never learn a flashy throw. In today's fast-paced world, people want a black belt in a year. They want an app that gives them constant novelty and gamification.
We want quick results.
Exactly. So what was the psychological purpose behind this agonizingly slow, repetitive training? Why put your students through that mental grind?
Because Miyagi understood human neuroscience before we even had the vocabulary for it. He was trying to forge a state of mission, which is a Zen concept that translates to no mind.
No mind.
Right. Think about it. If you were in a chaotic, violent street fight and someone swings a bottle at your head, if you have to consciously think, okay, he is attacking my left side, I need to raise my right arm to a 35-degree angle to block, you are already unconscious on the pavement.
Conscious thought is way too slow.
Exactly. By repeating the Sanchin movements tens of thousands of times under immense physical tension, the biomechanics bypass the prefrontal cortex entirely.
It becomes instinct.
They embed themselves directly into the central nervous system. Your body reacts optimally without your brain having to ask permission.
It's the ultimate form of habit building, but it's also a psychological filter, right? I mean, if you can't handle the sheer boredom and pain of doing the exact same stance for 3 years, you definitely aren't going to have the mental fortitude to survive a life or death encounter.
Precisely. It breaks down the ego. You strip away the student's vanity completely.
And it wasn't just mental, it was a brutal, unforgiving physical conditioning. They employed tools called Hojo Undo.
Yeah, the traditional conditioning tools.
They were lifting heavy ceramic jars gripped only by the fingertips to build crushing grip strength for that stand-up grappling we talked about. They were repeatedly striking hard wooden posts called Makiwara thousands of times a day.
Which literally changes your physiology.
It changes the density of your skeleton. It's called Wolff's Law in biology. If you subject bones to microtrauma, they don't just heal, they calcify and heal denser and thicker than before.
It's an incredible adaptation.
They were systematically microfracturing their own knuckles, shins, and forearms, literally turning the human body into a weaponized, indestructible object.
It was pure survival technology.
Yeah.
It was passed down from a time when these techniques were quite literally the only thing standing between you and death at the hands of bandits or invading soldiers.
But here's where the story takes a massive counterintuitive turn.
Yeah, this is the tragic irony of it all.
Despite Miyagi having this incredible mastery, this indestructible body, and this profound understanding of biomechanics, the actual art he was practicing was dying.
It was facing a total existential crisis.
How does that even happen?
Well, by the 1920s, The native Okinawan martial art, which they simply called Tode, meaning Chinese hand, was fading into obscurity.
Because the world was changing.
Exactly. You have to remember the context we set up earlier. Okinawa is rapidly modernizing. They're being assimilated into the Japanese Empire. The younger generation is looking toward the future.
They want modern things.
Right. They are listening to jazz, they're wearing Western clothes, they want to be modern citizens of a burgeoning empire. The idea of standing barefoot in a dirt courtyard, sweating for 4 hours a day to learn a secretive, archaic fighting style from an old man, it held zero appeal.
Todo was viewed as a relic of a backwards past.
It was on the verge of total, irreversible extinction.
So Miyagi realizes he has to act. He can't just sit in his dojo and wait for students who are never going to show up. In 1926, he does something unprecedented.
He brings everyone together.
Yeah, he teams up with a veritable Avengers squad of Okinawan martial arts legends. Guys like Mabuni Kenwa, Motobu Choki, and Hanashiro Chomo.
These are absolute heavyweights of the era.
They established the Okinawa Karate Club in Naha. Their goal is to systematize the art, pull it out of the shadows, research it openly, and save it for future generations.
It was a beautiful idea, but practically it was a failure.
Really? Even with all those legends?
Despite their combined legendary status, the clubs struggled immensely. They were constantly on the brink of financial ruin. The local Okinawan interest just wasn't there to sustain a full-time professional institution.
The youth just didn't care.
No. To save his art, Miyagi realized a harsh truth. The island of Okinawa was too small, and its people too focused on assimilation to preserve Tode. He had to look beyond the island. He had to look to the Japanese mainland.
And then, in 1927, the ultimate catalyst arrives in Okinawa. The real turning point of this entire story. A man named Kano Jigoro visits the island.
Kano Jigoro is a monumental, almost mythic figure in Japanese history.
He's huge.
He wasn't just a martial artist. He was a brilliant intellectual, an educator, a diplomat, and the founder of Kodokan Judo.
Kano comes to Okinawa, and he watches Miyagi and Mabuni perform their art. He watches them demonstrate the raw power, the breathing, the grappling, and he is absolutely mesmerized.
It blew him away.
He urges them to bring this Okinawan fighting style to the Japanese mainland. But I want to make it clear to you listening, this isn't just a friendly suggestion from a fan. Kano is handing them the master key to survival.
Kano had already achieved the impossible on the mainland, and he saw the potential for Miyagi to do the exact same thing.
Right.
Kano had taken the ancient, highly lethal, and often disjointed samurai grappling arts of Jiu-Jitsu, and he had completely rebranded and systematized them into what he called Judo.
Let's actually explore how Kano did that, because it's the exact blueprint Miyagi ends up using. Jiu-Jitsu was designed for battlefield survival, right? It involved gouging eyes, snapping small joints, and breaking necks.
Exactly. It was highly effective for war, but it was too dangerous to practice safely at full speed, and it had a terrible reputation as the domain of street thugs and brawlers in the modernized Meiji era.
So what did Kano do?
Kano stripped out the most lethal maiming techniques. He created the system where you could throw an opponent and pin them safely, but more importantly, he pitched it to the Japanese government.
Ah, the politics.
Yes. He pitched it not just as combat training, but as a path for physical education, discipline, and moral development for the youth.
He sanitized it. He took a system designed to kill people on a battlefield and turned it into a state-sponsored jacket wrestling sport that you could teach to high school kids in a gymnasium.
It was a stroke of genius.
And he showed Miyagi the exact formula required to save an art from extinction. You cannot rely on secret backyard dojos. You have to institutionalize it.
Kano proved that if you align your martial art with the educational, physical, and nationalistic goals of the state, you secure its survival indefinitely.
The state will fund it, the schools will teach it, and the culture will revere it.
Exactly. Kano basically tells Miyagi, your art is incredible, but if you leave it here in Okinawa, it will die. Do with your art what I did with mine. Bring it to Tokyo.
So, armed with Kano's endorsement, Miyagi makes the leap. He heads to the Japanese mainland. And he is about to step into an incredibly high-stakes, highly dangerous game of cultural politics.
In 1928, Miyagi travels to Kyoto. He begins performing demonstrations at prestigious universities like Kyoto University and Kansai University.
Trying to get the academics on his side.
He's trying to build a base among the educated elite, yeah.
Oh.
But his ultimate target, the gatekeeper he absolutely must win over, is the Dai Nippon Butokukai, or the DNBK.
We really need to emphasize how massive and terrifyingly powerful the DNBK was. They weren't just a regulatory board for sports.
Not at all.
They were the supreme state-sponsored authority overseeing all martial arts in the Japanese Empire. They were deeply, inextricably tied to the government and the military establishment. If the DNBK didn't recognize your martial art, you basically didn't exist. You couldn't teach in schools, you couldn't get funding, you were nothing.
And the DNBK was highly bureaucratic. Yeah. To get that recognition, Miyagi couldn't just show up and punch a wooden post. He had to systematize his art according to mainland standards.
Which means paperwork and labels.
Right. Ahead of a major DNBK festival in 1935, the organization mandated a new rule. All martial arts practitioners had to officially name their styles. Up until then, Miyagi and his peers just called it Naha-te or Tode.
Which wouldn't fly on official government paperwork, so Miyagi has to come up with a brand name for his life's work.
He needed a formal title.
He chooses the name Goju-Ryu, which translates to the hard-soft style. And what I find fascinating is that he didn't just pull this out of thin air or, hire a marketing firm.
No, it has deep roots.
He reached back into the Chinese history of the art. He drew the name from a classical Chinese martial arts text called the Bubishi, specifically the 8 Precepts of Kempo, which states, "The way inhales and exhales hardness and softness."
It is the perfect linguistic encapsulation of everything he was teaching.
How so?
Well, the hard refers to the closed fist strikes, the rigid iron body conditioning, the microfractured bones, and the intense internal pressure of the Sanchin kata.
And the soft.
The soft refers to the circular evasions, the open-handed deflections, the grappling and joint locks, and the flexible breathing techniques that allow you to flow around an opponent's force rather than just colliding with it.
It is the ultimate synthesis of opposites.
It really is.
But naming the specific style was actually the easy part. The real geopolitical minefield they step into was the name of the overarching art itself. The native Okinawan name was Toad, and the written Chinese characters for Toda literally translated to Chinese hand.
This is where martial arts history collides violently with geopolitical history.
Right, because of what was happening in the 1930s?
Exactly. As we move through the late 1920s and into the 1930s, the Japanese Empire is rapidly, aggressively moving toward militarism and expansionism. The geopolitical climate is incredibly tense, leading up to the Mukden incident in 1931 and the eventual outbreak of the Second Sino-Japanese War.
Japanese nationalism is at an absolute fever pitch.
Anything associated with China was viewed with intense hostility, suspicion, and outright hatred by the Japanese establishment.
So, if you are Chojun Miyagi, an Okinawan outsider, and you are standing in front of the imperial Japanese government, asking them to sponsor and fund your martial art, calling it Chinese hand, is literal political suicide.
It was an absolute non-starter. The DNBK would never allow Japanese youth to practice something explicitly honoring China while the military was preparing for war with them.
It just wasn't going to happen.
So there was a massive coordinated push from the mainland Japanese establishment, initiated and supported by other Okinawan masters who had moved to Tokyo like Gichin Funakoshi. They needed to change the written character of the art to survive.
They had to change the kanji.
They proposed changing the kanji character for China, which was pronounced kara, to a completely different kanji character that sounded exactly the same but meant empty.
It's a linguistic sleight of hand. Chinese hand magically becomes empty hand. Karate.
Precisely. And to justify this change to the academics and the philosophers of the DNBK, they didn't just say, "We are changing it because we hate China."
That wouldn't sound very philosophical.
Right. They cited the Buddhist concept of emptiness from the Heart Sutra. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. They argued that the art was about emptying the mind of ego and malice, about being unarmed and empty-handed.
It was a brilliant, elegant, and highly pragmatic philosophical rebrand. It completely sanitized the art of its Chinese roots, making it entirely palatable to Japanese nationalism.
But it was a heavy choice for Miyagi.
Yeah, how did he feel about this? Because you mentioned earlier how deeply he respected his time in Fuzhou. He knew exactly where the art came from.
The historical records show he was deeply, profoundly conflicted. He was a pragmatist. On one hand, he was thrilled to get DNBK recognition because it meant survival.
It meant his life's work wouldn't vanish.
In 1937, he was awarded the title of Kyoshi by the DNBK. This was the highest teaching rank available. It officially cemented his art into the Japanese establishment. He had done it. He had saved the art from extinction.
But at what cost?
Exactly. Because on the other hand, Miyagi was fiercely, stubbornly proud of his art's Fujian and Chinese roots. He explicitly and publicly stated that his art derived from Southern Shaolin boxing.
You didn't want to hide it.
He warned his peers that dropping the China character might historically distort the art's true origins, that future generations might actually forget where these brilliant biomechanics came from.
He knew he was making a Faustian bargain. He was ensuring the physical survival of the movements, but he was actively participating in erasing the historical truth of their genesis.
It was a heartbreaking compromise.
And as if dealing with imperial politics and the threat of cultural erasure wasn't enough, Miyagi's teachings on the mainland eventually spark a massive, violent rebellion among his own students.
It's a fascinating unintended consequence of his success there.
It really is. A rebellion that causes a permanent fracture in martial arts history and actually births the modern combat sports we watch on TV today.
So Miyagi is commuting from Okinawa to Tokyo and Kyoto every 2 months. He is teaching at university clubs, particularly the Ritsumeikan University Hub. Among his students are 2 young men who will change the trajectory of martial arts forever. A fierce, highly aggressive Japanese student named Gogen Yamaguchi, and a physically imposing, incredibly powerful Korean-born student named So Nichu.
So we have to establish the core tension here. Miyagi's traditional Okinawan training, the stuff he brought from Fuzhou and perfected in Naha, consisted almost entirely of those microscopic kata breakdowns.
Right, the solo forms.
It was the breathing, the iron body conditioning, and highly choreographed, prearranged 2-person drills where you knew exactly what punch was coming. It did not have free, unscripted sparring. You did not just put on gloves and try to knock each other out.
Because to Miyagi, the techniques were too dangerous to use dynamically without severely injuring your training partner, and the goal was perfection of the form, not winning a sporting match.
But these mainland university students, Yamaguchi, Sonichu, and their peers, they were young, testosterone-fueled, and steeped in a culture of Japanese militarism.
They wanted to fight.
They didn't just want to perfect a kata. They wanted to test these lethal techniques in practical, chaotic combat. They wanted to know exactly what happens when someone is actually trying to knock you out. So they go behind Miyagi's back and they invent Jiu-Jitsu free sparring.
And because they didn't have modern MMA gloves or mouth guards, the sheer violence of what they were doing was insane.
How did they even survive it?
They were using heavy protective gear just to not kill each other. They were strapping on kendo masks with metal grills and strapping baseball catchers' chest protectors to their ribs, just so they could hit each other full force without caving in a lung.
And Miyagi is absolutely furious when he finds out.
Oh, he was livid.
I can imagine. He spent his life preserving the precise physics of this art, and these college kids are just turning it into a bar brawl.
He was incredibly critical of it. Miyagi argued that chaotic, unscripted fighting would fundamentally distort the kata. He believed that in the chaos and the adrenaline dump of a real fight, if you haven't perfected the form through millions of slow repetitions, the pristine biomechanical perfection he had spent decades building would instantly degrade into sloppy, ineffective brawling. You would lose the art.
I look at it like a classical music versus jazz analogy.
Oh, that's a good way to frame it.
Miyagi is a classical maestro. He insists that you have to play the sheet music, the kata, perfectly, thousands of times. You have to understand the physics of the sound, the exact placement of your fingers on the violin strings.
Yeah.
But his mainland students, Yamaguchi and Sonichu, they want to throw away the sheet music. They want to go down into a gritty, smoke-filled jazz club and just improvise. They want to take those classical techniques and use them in a chaotic, live environment, adapting on the fly.
That is a perfect encapsulation of the philosophical divide. And that jazz club environment they created at Ritsumeikan University was shockingly brutal.
Just non-stop violence.
The historical accounts note that when So Nichu would strap on the protective gear and step onto the floor to spar, most of the other club members would literally run away and hide in the locker rooms.
Wow.
Very few human beings could withstand the sheer violence and intensity of that training.
And this mainland university rebellion has a massive, undeniable domino effect on the entire modern landscape of combat sports. Because we have to talk about who asked her it.
So Nichu ended up training.
This is where the history connects directly to the present day. So Nichu, the terrifying Korean-born sparring innovator, becomes the direct mentor and teacher to a young, intensely dedicated Korean-Japanese man named Choi Young-ai.
A name that might not sound familiar to everyone.
Right, because the world later came to know this man as Mas Oyama.
Mas Oyama, the founder of Kyokushin Karate, Oyama is a total legend. He's the guy famous for allegedly fighting bulls barehanded.
That's the one. Oyama takes this incredibly violent, sparring-heavy version of Goju-Ryu that Sonichu taught him, and he dials it up to 11. He strips away even more of the classical constraint and creates Kyokushin, which translates to ultimate truth.
It becomes the first true, full-contact, bare-knuckle knockout karate style in the world.
And if we trace that lineage even further down the timeline, the connections are explicit. Mas Oyama's Kyokushin dojo is directly linked to the birth of modern kickboxing.
Yes, through his elite students.
Oyama had guys like Kenji Kurosaki. Kurosaki helped cross-train a giant, terrifying Dutchman named John Blooming. Blooming takes that brutal, full-contact Kyokushin philosophy, combined with judo, back to the Netherlands.
Which is huge for martial arts history.
It directly leads to the creation of the legendary Dutch kickboxing scene gyms like Chakariki and Michiro Gym, which produced some of the greatest strikers in history.
An incredible lineage.
So, if you are sitting at home right now watching a UFC pay-per-view, and you see a fighter throw a devastating Dutch-style low kick or a vicious close-quarters knee strike, the entire global phenomenon of Dutch kickboxing, the fundamental striking DNA of modern MMA, traces its roots right back to Sonichu and Yamaguchi rebelling against Miyagi's strict classical rules in a Kyoto University club. It's wild. It all connects.
It is a profound evolution, but it creates a fascinating paradox when you look at Miyagi himself.
Because he hated it.
Right. Because while his mainland students were actively making his art more violent, more competitive, and more combat-oriented, Miyagi was traveling the world trying to preach its peaceful, philosophical, foundational roots.
Let's pivot and talk about Miyagi, the global ambassador, because his trips really highlight his deep empathy and his respect for the history of the art. He wasn't a warmonger at all. In 1934, he travels to Hawaii.
He was invited by a Japanese newspaper to promote the art.
And we have to correct a modern misconception here. Hawaii at this time in the 1930s wasn't just a tropical paradise where people went on vacation.
No, the reality for Okinawans there was incredibly grim. Following the collapse of the Ryukyu Kingdom's economy, thousands of Okinawans migrated to Hawaii to work as laborers on the massive sugarcane plantations.
Seeking a better life.
But the conditions they faced were horrific. They were treated as second-class citizens, worked to the bone, and were utterly destitute, suffering from extreme poverty.
The details from the historical accounts are heartbreaking. They mention that these laborers were sometimes forced to survive by eating toxic cycad seeds,
which are incredibly dangerous.
Cycad seeds contain potent neurotoxins. You have to put them through a grueling, weeks-long detoxification process of soaking and fermenting just to render them safe enough to eat without dying. That is the level of starvation these people were facing.
And Miyagi goes there. He doesn't go there to start a massive commercial franchise or sell black belts to rich tourists. He goes to teach these suffering, starving immigrants.
Which raises a really interesting question. How do you teach a highly physical, exhausting martial art to people who are severely malnourished and physically broken from manual labor?
You don't focus on the physical combat.
Okay, what do you do?
You focus on the internal mechanics. He used the breathing exercises, the Sanchin, not to teach them how to fight in the streets, but to give them back a sense of cultural identity.
Wow.
He used the slow, deliberate movements to generate internal heat and energy, giving them spiritual and physical resilience in the face of brutal labor conditions. He was using karate as medicine, really, as a tool for human dignity.
That is just incredible. Then 2 years later, in 1936, at the age of 48, Miyagi makes a profoundly symbolic journey. He returns to China. His lifelong dream was to visit the legendary Shaolin Temple in Henan Province, the mythological birthplace of his art's roots.
It was supposed to be the culmination of his life's research.
But did he make it to the temple?
Unfortunately, no. The political instability of the era, the warlord era in China, and the brewing military conflict made deep travel into the interior impossible. However, he did visit regions like Hebei and Shanghai. And while he was in Shanghai, he famously met and exchanged techniques with the Jingwu Athletic Association, which was a massive Chinese martial arts organization.
I want to highlight how brave that is. He is actively paying respect, in person, to the Chinese origins of his art. Right at the exact historical moment, the Japanese imperial government back home is forcing everyone to erase those Chinese origins.
Yeah, he is actively defying the cultural erasure.
He refused to let the history die.
Exactly. He was a man of deep, unshakable principles. And it speaks to his underlying philosophy, which stands in absolute stark contrast to the violent reputation of the combat sports that eventually evolved from his students.
Because he abhorred martial showmanship. He hated the idea of breaking boards or showing off high kicks or using martial arts to intimidate people.
There is a specific quote of his that I think defines him entirely. He told his students, "Do not be struck by others, do not strike others, make peace your foundation."
Think about the weight of those words. For a man whose body was conditioned over decades to be a literal bone-breaking weapon. A man who could likely kill someone with a single well-placed strike.
To have the restraint and the wisdom to say, "Make peace your foundation," is a profound philosophical statement. The violence was only a vehicle to understand the self.
And as Miyagi approached the end of his life, he passed away in 1953 in a post-war, devastated Okinawa. His senior student, Mitoku Yagi, asked him a final question. He asked him to reveal the ultimate secret of Goju-Ryu.
And Miyagi's answer wasn't some hidden, lethal pressure point technique. It wasn't a mystical incantation.
No. His answer was, the fact that I keep repeating the same thing over and over, that itself is the ultimate secret and my final testament.
It brings the entire journey right back to Sanchin.
The secret is the work. The secret is the agonizing, boring, painful repetition. The secret is the dedication, the breaking down of the ego, until the movement simply becomes an innate part of who you are. There are no shortcuts.
It's a beautiful philosophy. But when we look at the legacy Miyagi actually left behind, it is deeply fractured.
He essentially left behind a dual legacy. In Okinawa, Goju-Ryu remained mostly what he intended, a deeply traditional, localized art. It remained focused heavily on mind and body conditioning, on perfecting the kata, on self-improvement and self-defense.
But on the mainland, thanks to the university rebellions of Yamaguchi and Sonichu, it evolved into a highly competitive, sparring-based system.
And let's be honest about history. It was that mainland, sanitized combat sport version, the version that successfully integrated with the Japanese imperial system and later adapted to the global sports market, that ultimately conquered the globe.
It's a version that eventually made it into the Olympic Games.
Which brings us to the final, incredibly provocative thought we derive from the historical records, and it is a fascinating and kind of tragic realization, because that sanitized mainland sport version of karate has become so globally dominant today.
Right. It is so financially and socially incentivized with gold medals, Olympic pathways, and international tournaments that it is actually replacing the original art back in Okinawa itself.
Young Okinawan kids aren't going to the local masters to stand in horse stances for hours. They are going to sport dojos to learn the mainland version, because that's what wins tournaments and gets you on TV.
And the tragedy here goes far beyond just the physical movements of a martial art. The historical sources highlight a much deeper cultural death occurring right now. The native Okinawan language, Uchidaguchi, is dying out.
Which is just devastating.
It was banned in schools for decades during the assimilation period. Most young Okinawans today cannot even understand a casual conversation spoken by their own grandparents.
And I remember reading that in our sources and thinking, okay, that's sad linguistically, but why does that specifically matter for the martial art?
Because language isn't just a way to say hello. Language is an operating system. Uchinaguchi holds the actual phonetic keys to the art Miyagi created. The original names of the techniques, the nuanced, complex concepts of internal body mechanics, the subtle cues for breath and tension, they were all codified and taught in that native language.
I never thought about it like that.
When the language dies, the actual phonetic keys to unlocking the original meanings and biomechanics of Miyagi's ancient repetitive movements fade into silence.
You literally lose the software that runs the hardware.
Exactly. You are left with the physical shell of the movement. You can see the punch, but without the deep linguistic context, you don't actually know how the internal machinery is supposed to work.
So it leaves you with this incredible, heavy paradox to mull over. Chojun Miyagi absolutely saved his art. He saved it from extinction by institutionalizing it, rebranding it, and sending it to the Japanese mainland.
He succeeded in his mission.
He did. But in our modern rush to globalize, to commercialize, and to turn these ancient, desperate survival systems into shiny competitive sports, are we actively erasing the very soul of the master who saved it? Are we all just out here painting the fence without ever understanding what the paint is actually made of?